Welcome to another week of Historical Geography. This week we're going to be tackling Ai. Ai is another one of my favorite places to visit, and we do it on the same day that we go to Shechem and Shiloh and to Bethel, which is very close to here. And obviously we talked about in our trip to Bethel, we talked a lot about Ai because they're neighboring towns and often are mixed together in the biblical narrative. Things that happen in Bethel affect what happens in Ai, and things that happen in Ai affect what happens in Bethel as well. So for the most part, Ai is important for the biblical narrative in the book of Joshua. And so we're going to be spending some time there in just a few moments. But as usual, I want to take you to some slides for some maps and some timelines, just to get us oriented in terms of time and space. Then we'll come back and we'll look at this place of Ai from on top of the tell.
Okay, let's take just a few minutes to do some orientation in terms of time and place here. So here we are again, Historical Geography of the Holy Land, week 13, and we are still in the area of Ephraim and Samaria, and now we're in part 4 of Ai. So here we go. This is our normal map for orientation. Again, you see the Mediterranean Sea, of course, here, the Arabian Desert over here, which are our bookends, and then we have the Jordan River Valley here, the Rift Valley, that runs from the north up here, Mount Hermon, down through the Sea of Galilee, down along the Jordan River here, into the Dead Sea. Again, we want to orient ourselves in terms of the capital. So here Jerusalem is at the northern edge of the Dead Sea, in about a third of the way. Mount Carmel is the thumb sticking out into the Mediterranean here, and that's where we find ourselves. So now we've oriented ourselves on the big picture. Let's move in a little bit. This is what it looks like on the satellite map. Again, we're in the West Bank area here, in this big spot right there. And I want to show you where we have been so far. All the places listed on this map are places that we've already done videos. And so we started out this way, went to Tel Aviv, moved up the coast, came up this way, moved all the way up to the north to Dan, Caesarea Philippi, then made our way back down through the Jordan Rift Valley, eventually coming to Jericho and Qumran, and then to En-Gedi and Masada. And then we made our way west again, came through Beersheba to Lachish and Azekah, and then up towards Jerusalem, which is where we are based now with our bus. But then we take one more day trip from there, from Jerusalem, and go up into the area of Ephraim and Samaria. And so we actually went all the way to the north of that area in Shechem and Sychar. So Sychar, of course, where the woman at the well met with Jesus, and so many things happened at Shechem. Then we spent some time at Shiloh, where the tabernacle sat for a good portion of its history. And now we're making our way back down south again towards Jerusalem. Last time we were at Bethel. Bethel is about 20 miles due north of Jerusalem, so not very far now from Jerusalem. And then Ai, which is just a little bit to its southeast. And so that's where we are. Bethel and Ai, only about 1.5 miles, 2 miles apart, so very small distance separating them there. Let's look at it in terms of time. Okay, so for Ai, our biggest period of time is the conquest. Of course, the beginning of that conquest. So we're right here in the time of Joshua, in the early 15th century. Early 14th century BC. So about 1406 or so. 1405 is where we are for the events of Joshua that we were about to get to. I want to show you some pictures. This is actually looking back towards Ai from Bethel. Okay, so again, they're not very far apart. There's a hill separating them here, and in fact, another hill beyond that. This tower here stands on the northern edge, the western edge, really, of the town of, the modern town that is closest to Ai, the ruins of Ai. Down through this valley here, you can see this falls away all the way down to the Jordan Rift Valley. On a clear day, you can see the Jordan Rift Valley a little bit more, although it's always hazy down there, so there's very few very clear days. But this is a very steep descent in elevation down to the Jordan Rift Valley there. And on this picture here, if you can picture it in your mind, Jericho would be right about here. And Gilgal, where the Israelites would have been based during the conquest, is right about here. Okay, so not very far down that way. And again, there's a rift or a valley that runs right up through here that you can follow pretty easily by foot. Now we're looking at the tell at Ai from down below, so this is fairly close to the tell. I'm not sure which side of the tell we're looking at here. It seems to me this would maybe be the south side of the tell looking up towards the top. A little difficult to orient myself on that, but you can see some walls that were found. These are all stone walls built here as defensive systems out here to guard the top of this tell. This would, I think, pretty much this is going to be down towards the Rift Valley down this way. So this would be down east. I think this would be west over here, north to this side. So I think we're looking from the south to the north. Again, this is the tell. Here's the modern buildings around it. Very interesting things that we'll talk about when we're there in terms of what's happening modern days there. Most of these houses are empty most of the year. There are people who live actually in the States most of the time, but they have but their roots are here, and so they have a house here in the West Bank as well. Again, getting up just a little bit closer on that tell, see those walls a little bit closer up, and just you see how the construction out of stone happens there. And now let's go back to our discussion of Joshua.
All right, here we are at Ai, and we're standing on top of the tell. And you can see behind me the modern little town that's back there, which is interesting in and of itself, but it's not the focus of what we're going to be talking about today. Really, Ai plays its most significant role in the book of Joshua. And so in Joshua chapter 7, let me set the scene for you a little bit. This is the beginning of the conquest. And we've talked about it before. The conquest is really a divide and conquer strategy. And so God has them come in and take out the middle section, which includes Jericho, Ai, and Bethel. And then that separates the northern section from the southern section of Canaan. And that makes it so that the northern section and the southern section can't unite together to fight against the Israelites as they're coming into the land. And so this is the very beginning stage, that divide and conquer. They're actually doing the divide part now. And so as they come in through the middle and take out that middle section, Ai is actually the second place on their agenda. Of course, Jericho being the first, and we talked about Jericho a number of weeks ago. And certainly Jericho is the one that gets our attention most in the time of the conquest. And you know a lot about that story. And Jericho is a miraculous event. And you can think about it from the point of view of the Israelites as they're walking into the land, right? They may have their doubts when they get to Jericho about God's plan for taking it, marching it around it several times. But then watching the walls fall, they see that God is miraculously involved, that he is personally involved in this conquest of the land. There is no other explanation for the fall of Jericho than God made it happen. And that's exactly God's intention. He wants to make sure that the Israelites know that he is with them and that they will have success as long as he is with them. But in order for him to be with them, they need to follow his instructions. And we saw that in Jericho. It seemed like they followed his instructions to the letter. They do exactly what he say in terms of marching it around it on the days that he tells them to, and then he gives it into their hands. But one of the instructions that he had given is that they're not to take any plunder from there. And that, unfortunately, is not followed. And yet, when we get to chapter 7, what's interesting about the narrative here is that the author tells us what's happening before the characters in the story know what's happening. And so I think that's often a very interesting facet of Scripture. Sometimes we as an audience have a great advantage over those who are actually living the events in real time, because we can look back on the events, we know where they're leading to, and we get God's point of view on what's happening or about to happen in the narrative sometimes before the characters themselves know what's about to happen. And that's what happens as we come to Joshua chapter 7. Again, as you look at the map behind, or the picture behind me here, what you'll see is that I'm standing on top of the tell, and you can see the modern city or modern little town that's right there behind me. Down past that is the Jordan Valley. You can almost see down to the Jordan River down there. It's a little bit of a cloudy day as I took this picture here, but down there is the Jordan Valley. So you're falling away down into the rift, and the river would be flowing through there, probably at a much greater rate than it is today. And then you would have been able to see almost to the Dead Sea from here as well. You could almost see Jericho in this picture. And probably Gilgal on a very clear day where Israel had set up its base of operations for the conquest, Gilgal, just north of Jericho, probably would have been visible from this point of view here, just down those valleys falling away to the Dead Sea behind me there. Okay, let me take you to Joshua chapter 7, and we'll start to read the story. Again, remembering that we're getting a piece of the puzzle that Joshua doesn't yet have at the beginning. Let's go to Joshua chapter 7, and I'll begin reading from verse 1. But the people of Israel broke faith in regard to the devoted things, For Achan, the son of Carmi, son of Zabdi, son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took some of the devoted things. And the anger of the Lord burned against the people of Israel. Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Bethaven, east of Bethel, and said to them, Go up and spy out the land. And the men went up and spied out Ai. And they returned to Joshua and said to him, Do not have all the people go up, but let about 2,000 or 3,000 men go up and attack Ai. Do not make the whole people toil up there, for they are few. So about 3,000 men went up from the people, and they fled before the men of Ai. And the men of Ai killed about 36 of their men, and chased them before the gate as far as Shebarim, and struck them at the descent. And the hearts of the people melted and became as water. Then Joshua tore his clothes and fell to the earth on his face before the ark of the Lord until the evening, he and the elders of Israel. And they put dust on their heads. And Joshua said, Alas, O Lord God, why have you brought this people over the Jordan at all, to give us into the hands of the Amorites, to destroy us? Would that we had been content to dwell beyond the Jordan. O Lord, what can I say, when Israel has turned their backs before their enemies? For the Canaanites and all the inhabitants of the land will hear of it, and will surround us, and cut off our name from the earth. And what will you do for your great name? Let's stop there just for a second. I want to talk about that. Have you ever felt like maybe you opened your mouth a little bit too soon? Maybe you said something before you knew all the facts that were involved here. Unfortunately, that's the situation Joshua finds himself in. He doesn't yet know all of the facts, and he's made an actual overreaction to what's going on here. He thinks that they should have just stayed across the Jordan. Again, remember, this is only their second battle, and they've been very successful in their first, seen the grace of the Lord, probably celebrated that victory a lot back in their camp. And now on the second campaign, the second little battle that they have, things go wrong, and immediately Joshua says, maybe we should have just stayed home. And now let's turn to the verse 10 then, following along. This is what Joshua doesn't know at that point. The Lord said to Joshua, Get up. Why have you fallen on your face? Israel has sinned. They have transgressed my covenant that I commanded them. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen and lied and put them among their own belongings. Therefore the people of Israel cannot stand before their enemies. They turn their backs before their enemies because they have become devoted for destruction. Just a couple of words on that. This is a phrase that's used a lot in the conquest narrative, and before and after it a bit, but devoted for destruction. What that means is that they have sinned and that they are themselves set apart for destruction. So all the Canaanites are called devoted for destruction, and for that reason God is actually giving them into the hands of the Israelites. It's not because the Israelites are better than the Canaanites. It's because the Canaanites have forfeited their right to the land because of their disobedience to God and because of their idolatry. And so God has devoted them for destruction. But what's interesting here is that Israel itself is called devoted for destruction too. Because God has told them, if you're no different from those people that we take you in to conquer, then I'm also going to remove you from the land. Remember, we've talked about this in other classes as well, but looking back to the penalty that was in place for the people if they failed to do what God had told them to do, the ultimate penalty was for them to go into exile, to be taken out of the land. God says, it's my land and I'll give it to whomever I want. And so if you're no different from the people that you're taking out, you will be no different in terms of the result that happens to you too. You too will be taken out of the land. Let's go back to the text. So they have become devoted to destruction. We're in verse 12, about the middle of it. I will be with you no more unless you destroy the devoted things from among you. Get up, consecrate the people, and say, Consecrate yourselves for tomorrow. For thus says the Lord, God of Israel, there are devoted things in your midst, O Israel. You cannot stand before your enemies until you take away the devoted things from among you. In the morning, therefore, you shall be brought near by your tribes. And the tribe that the Lord takes by lot shall come near by clans. And the clan that the Lord takes shall come near by households. And the household that the Lord takes shall come near man by man. And he who is taken with the devoted things shall be burned with fire, he and all that he has, because he has transgressed the covenant of the Lord, and because he has done an outrageous thing in Israel. So Joshua rose early in the morning and brought Israel near tribe by tribe, and the tribe of Judah was taken. Now, we're not going to follow through with the rest of this text. I think you know where this is headed. Eventually, they get to Achan. They find out that it's him, and they devote him and his family to destruction, along with all of the things that he had taken in the siege of Jericho. And so that is the reason that Ai did not fall the very first time, is because knowingly or not, Joshua led the people in there while they themselves were impure. And God says, as an example for the whole nation of Israel, we're going to deal with the sin in the camp before you're allowed to move any further. In fact, before you're allowed to have even an inch of this land that I'm giving to you. So God comes down on them very harshly that very first time, but now they're going to have success. We know this from chapter 8. Let's go to chapter 8, and we'll start in verse 1 there. So the fall of Ai, this is the second time that they go up to battle against it. Chapter 8, verse 1, "And the Lord said to Joshua, Do not fear, and do not be dismayed. Take all the fighting men with you, and arise, go up to Ai. See, I have given into your hand the king of Ai and his people, his city and his land. And you shall do to Ai and its king as you did to Jericho and its king. Only its spoil and its livestock you shall take as plunder for yourselves." See, it's different from what he said about Jericho. "Lay an ambush against the city behind it." So Joshua and all the fighting men arose to go up to Ai. And Joshua chose 30,000 mighty men of valor and sent them out by night. And he commanded them, "Behold, you shall lie in ambush against the city behind it. Do not go very far from the city, but all of you remain steady, or remain ready. And I and all the people who are with me will approach the city. And when they come out against us, just as before, we shall flee before them. And they will come out after us until we have drawn them away from the city. For they will say, They are fleeing from us just as before, so we will flee before them. Then you shall rise up and ambush the city and seize the city, for the Lord your God will give it into your hand. And as soon as you have taken the city, you shall set the city on fire. You shall do according to the word of the Lord. See, I have commanded you." So Joshua sent them out, and they went to the place of ambush, and lay between Bethel and Ai, to the west of Ai. But Joshua spent the night among the people. Okay, I just want to give us a shot of this as we're looking at this picture behind me here. I want to show you kind of how that works. You can see the valley that kind of comes up from the from the Dead Sea, from Jericho, and it comes up to the side up here. And there's a way to get around behind the city so that you can't be seen from the city if you sneak into the ravine that's behind it. And so that's what some of the men do. They go up behind the city and they camp out there at night. And then Joshua takes another section of the army, and they come up the valley again in the morning. And now I can see them coming because it's daylight, and they can see them coming up the valley. And now Ai is going to think, all the people in Ai are going to think, hey, this is just like before. We'll go out on them again. But they don't realize that there's a number of people camped behind. And so now they think, well, let's just go out and finish them off. So they take all of their army out. They know that they've fled from them before, and now it's our turn to wipe them out. So they take the whole army out of Ai. And as they do that, they leave it completely vulnerable. And the people who are the men of Joshua then, who are stationed behind the city, they come out around and ambush it and set it on fire. So here we are. Verse 10. Joshua arose early in the morning and mustered the people and went up, he and the elders of Israel, before the people to Ai. And all the fighting men who were with him went up and drew near before the city and encamped on the north side of Ai, with a ravine between them and Ai. He took about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai to the west of the city. So it's behind where I'm at right now. So they stationed the forces, the main encampment that was north of the city, and its rear guard west of the city. But Joshua spent that night in the valley. And as soon as the king of Ai saw this, he and all his people, the men of the city, hurried and went out early to the appointed place, toward the Arabah, which is the Dead Sea Valley, to meet Israel in battle. So they're coming down towards the valley. But he did not know that there was an ambush against him behind the city. And Joshua and all Israel pretended to be beaten before them and fled in the direction of the wilderness. So they take off running back down towards the Jordan Valley down there. So all the people who were in the city were called together to pursue them. And as they pursued Joshua, they were drawn away from the city. Not a man was left in Ai or Bethel who did not go out after Israel. So now they're getting help from Bethel. But nobody can see these people who are waiting in ambush. They left the city open and pursued Israel. Then the Lord said to Joshua, Stretch out the javelin that is in your hand toward Ai, for I will give it into your hand. And Joshua stretched out the javelin that was in his hand toward the city, and the men in the ambush rose quickly out of their place. And as soon as he stretched out his hand, they ran and entered the city and captured it. And they hurried to set the city on fire. So when the men of Ai looked back, behold, the smoke of the city went up to heaven, and they had no power to flee this way or that. For the people who fled to the wilderness turned back against the pursuers. And when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had captured the city, and that the smoke of the city went up, then they turned back and struck down the men of Ai. And the others came out from the city against them, so that they were in the midst of Israel, some on this side and some on that side. And Israel struck them down until there was left none that survived or escaped. But the king of Ai they took alive and brought him near to Joshua. When Israel had finished killing all the inhabitants of Ai in the open wilderness where they pursued them, and all of them to the very last had fallen by the edge of the sword, all Israel returned to Ai and struck it down with the edge of the sword. And all who fell that day, both men and women, were 12,000, all the people of Ai. But Joshua did not draw back his hand with which he stretched out the javelin until he had devoted all the inhabitants of Ai to destruction. Only the livestock and the spoil of that city Israel took as their plunder, according to the word of the Lord that he had commanded Joshua. So Joshua burned Ai and made it forever a heap of ruins, as it is to this day. And he hanged the king of Ai on a tree until evening. And at sunset Joshua commanded, and they took his body down from the tree, and threw it at the entrance of the gate of the city, and raised over it a great heap of stones, which stands there to this day. I just want to spend a little bit of time on those words at the very end. It says that he made it a heap of stones. He raised a great heap of stones, which stands there to this day. Also, verse 28, it says, so Joshua burned Ai and made it forever a heap of ruins, as it is to this day. Okay, so Ai wasn't to be re-inhabited for some time after Joshua's conquest, and it says that they made it a heap of stones. What I find really interesting is in 1933, a woman named Judith Marquette Krause came to excavate here at this very spot. And the reason she came here is because the name of the place was Et Tel, which means the ruin. And so when she came, I want to show you what she saw in 1933. This is a picture taken in 1933 before the excavations began. You see that huge heap of stones there? It's exactly what Joshua had described would be there, what the scriptures describe would be there as well. And so there's a huge heap of stones that they have to remove in order to start the excavations. Imagine, first of all, the work of putting all that huge heap of stones there. That would have taken weeks, months, maybe many months to put all those stones there. And it took them a great while to remove the stones. In fact, there is a statistic about how long it took, how many people it took, and how many tons of stones they removed from that place. And so that what they describe is exactly what was found there. Now, I have to tell you this, though, too. There is today a great deal of controversy over the site of Ai. Part of it has to do with the differences in the opinions about what kinds of things have been found here, particularly what kinds of pottery have been found. And so one of the primary ways that we use to date a site in archaeology today, and speaking like I'm an archaeologist, I'm not, or at least not yet, would love to be someday, but what archaeologists use largely to date a site is the pottery that is found there. And that's useful in a couple of ways. First of all, because different cultures tend to have different kinds of pottery, and also because pottery styles change over time. And so it can be, so the fashion and whatever it is that's connected with pottery in one generation might be different than one much later. And so it can be, as you're digging down through the layers of a tell, that you find different kinds of pottery in different layers, whether that's because it's a different civilization with different taste in pottery, or because there's the same civilization, but the trend has changed over time. And so they can date it that way. And also pottery has some relevance also for carbon-14 and other kinds of dating as well. There's some ways that you can, with the things that are found around it or in it, can help you to date it. And so there's a lot of different controversies today about whether this is the site of Ai or not. There are some who have dug here and have claimed that there is no pottery from the time of Joshua, that this place was already a ruin for many centuries before Joshua got here. And there are others who claim that this place wasn't inhabited at the same time that the Bible says that the conquest took place. And so it's possible that this place isn't Ai, that maybe Ai is another ruin that's nearby. But geographically, and actually due to this huge heap of stones here, it does make some sense that this would be the actual place of Ai. There are ongoing excavations there. It's been excavated a number of times over the last 100 years. And there's another group that's seeking to do excavations now here. Their objective actually is to try to find the gate to the city of Ai, and to see if there's a huge heap of stones on that gate, and if they can maybe even find the bones of the king of Ai that would be buried in that gate. But who knows if they'll find that or not. Maybe it's not important whether this is actually the site of Ai or not, but I can tell you one of my favorite reasons to visit this place is because you can see the events of Scripture played out on this very site. It fits very well geographically. Not that there might not be other places that fit geographically as well, but in my imagination, this tell works pretty well for understanding the biblical story here. So thank you for joining me this time for a little bit of discussion of the tell at Ai. And I can't wait to take you there and to visit it and stand on top here. It is one of my favorite places to stand because you can imagine the events that took place either here or very close to here in the biblical record. And so join me again next time, and we will head into Jerusalem. That's the next plan for our next stop. All right, thank you.